Hello there, I'm Callum Johns, and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. And this time I'm here to talk to you about the last of the Droids comics that I have to review, which is issues 5 until 8. So let's begin. These were written by George Caragoni, I believe it's pronounced, and it's illustrated by Mary Wilshire. And I believe they were also in 1987. And overall, I think very similar again to previous reviews of the Droids comics, mentioning mainly about the overall plots on paper and stuff, is that they're quite childish, very based off of the Droids cartoon, which I still have to watch the Droids cartoon, but they are very similar in art style and they are based on that. And so the dialogue is fairly childish as well. Like, simple. I won't say childish as much as simple, so the kids can understand it. And it's also very much geared towards a lot more humour than would be in some more adult stories that are obvious humour. Like puns and slapstick is more common among this story. And the visuals, they look like the Droids cartoon. That's pretty straightforward to know how it looks. My opinion on that is, like, it doesn't look as good, of course, as the main Marvel run actually got. Continuity for the Droids comic is an interesting thing, because according to sources, the Droids comics take place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, when an escape pod gets lost and they have to search for everything. And they sign up with the droid agency and that. But what I got confused about with this whole thing is, like, when they have that Lost in Time crossover event, it says that they travel 100 years into the future. And the Ewoks comics have to happen before the Empire starts building the Death Star 2, before, like, the Imperials come to create the bunker and take over the moon. So it's like, it's gotta be before that, I would think. Unless we're throwing out the line that they say how long it was that they travelled in time, which 3PO could have been wrong. It's still a bit of an odd thing as far as continuity goes, in my opinion. And I think it would be better to have the Droids comics set before the Phantom Menace, for ease of also how the universe looks a bit with the different art style. Of course, they have some different aliens and stuff that appear in this, and because of some other little tidbits like the droid agency and the droid laws only being enforced in recent years, which could be because of the CIS, but also I think that droids would have been regulated before that. Even like in KOTOR, you've got assassin droids and stuff, so I'm like, surely they would have created laws for droids before then. Now, it is an official retcon, so you can say, okay, that's the official explanation for it. And of course, these droid comics do very much fall into C-canon, do very much fall into S-canon, and so the actual details of the story don't matter as much as just these events did happen at one point in time. So it could be explained like that, but I'm still questioning it a little bit, and it's not a huge issue as far as the overall story or anything. Just question it a little bit, going, what actually happened? Of course, these are kids' comics. They weren't written with much continuity in mind, because it was also before 1991 when Heir to the Empire came out, when they started putting more of an emphasis on continuity. So fun times with that. But anyway, that was my main thing with the continuity of these comics, is it's still odd, I think. Even with the official explanation, you have to ignore details that don't quite line up as you're reading them to go, okay. I guess it could go there, and at the same time it's like, does it quite work? Anyway, issue 5 is titled Separated, and this will be getting into the spoilers for anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled, because these are my notes as I read them. They're on Arduba, which is apparently a planet controlled by the Galactic Empire. Which is where even more of my continuity stuff goes. Like, okay, the official explanation seems to be better for this certain little detail. But then the other things that they say about earlier don't quite line up with that time frame. Unless these Droids comics take place at different points individually. That's another thing. Anyway, I can ramble about this continuity thing all day. And jokes. 3PO arguing it's R2's fault again, and because of not telling the difference between a computer port and a power socket. Very much callbacks to the movies. And on the hunt for a master again, this is the part that gets me into the continuity as well. Because there's apparently a lack of masters, and they go around hunting for masters, and I'm like, I would think at least by the time of episode 3, 19 years after episode 3, there would still be people wanting to be masters of droids fairly easily. Lots of people use droids at that time. And the other part that gets me about that is also that, like, we don't have the time before the Phantom Menace and after the Rutan Reformation solidly detailed to be able to go, well, yeah, they didn't regulate droids then, or, oh yeah, they already had the laws in beforehand. So I think that makes sense for me to go, the Rutan Reformations came in, not many people wanted to use droids at that time for whatever reason. Of course, some people did, but there aren't many masters for 3PO and R2, and they go and do that. That makes sense to me, personally. I am headcanoning it and fansplaining it, so the official retcon for these is actually to put them in between episode 3 and episode 4. I just don't feel like it lines up quite well enough for me. They go to, obviously called the Droid Store, where they go to be sold by a Van Pequist. Van Pequist. The names are interesting in these comics. And a Kirk Windjammer buys R2 but not 3PO, so it actually causes them to be separated. And of course 3PO bemoans the situation. 3PO's always complaining. You know that. I know that. We all know that. You watch the movies. And 3PO is bought by Baron Starlock with a droid accompaniment that almost ran them over a bit earlier as part of a slapstick joke. So it's interesting how they do connect things together in these. Now part 2 is Malice in the Palace. Haha, you can alliterate and rhyme. That's rhyming, not alliterating. What am I talking about? Oh, you can rhyme. 3PO is set to translating a document for Prince Jagoda when he overhears a plot to assassinate the prince and take over the planet. 3PO always gets mixed up in things, doesn't he? Unintentionally, he just wanders over things and goes, what's this? What's this? What's going on? And then, voila, he's there. Meanwhile, Windjammer is trying to find a hire and ends up in the Red Asteroid Bar, meeting a hooded figure which I guess will connect in somewhere later. Or in the end, it doesn't really matter who hired him, does it? Starlock is exiled after 3PO saved Jagoda's life by somehow defeating the bigger, more combat-ready droid that accompanied Starlock. Its designation was BX-00. And I'm sitting here like, 3PO's a protocol droid. How can he defeat a combat droid? I don't know how it works. It just does somehow. And after that, Jagoda fires his advisors and makes 3PO his sole advisor. Which is weird because it's like, 3PO saved your life, but why would you make him an advisor? What makes you think that he knows anything about running a government and being a king? Or even being a prince? He'd know the etiquette, he'd be programmed to know all of the protocols around it, but he wouldn't know how to deal with situations. But yes, that's how it goes. And when Windjammer said boat, he actually meant boat. Which was actually so weird for me to go. Windjammer said he wanted to hire to take his boat out. I was thinking he meant, oh, like a luxury yacht or some sort of ship. But he actually meant a boat that goes along the water. I'm like, oh, in Star Wars, okay. Usually they're called skimmers or something. There's a big gate that people have to pay taxes to pass. And apparently keeps the planet split. And it reminds me of, in real life, the Berlin Wall sort of situation where it just divided all the people rather than actually opening up and having everyone communicating and getting along. Part 3 is called Deceptions. Windjammer delivers the cargo, but the tractor beam messes up, the boxes break, and he finds out there's illegal weapons inside. Now he's getting attacked by the guys he's delivering it to. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And apparently, they were part of a plot to attack the kingdom for whatever reason. This was all connected to Starlock. It was exiled earlier. I thought it was cool that actually converted to a submarine to escape. It was pretty clever. And apparently, they now need to go to Prince Jagoda to warn him. However, Windjammer knows to go to Prince Jagoda. And with no indication he's got skill at all, once they go there, R2 and 3PO are reunited and that Windjammer is promoted to lead Jagoda's forces. And I'm like, why? Why are you doing that? He's a bloke that just goes and takes his boat on joyrides and people hire him to smuggle things. It's like, why are you promoting him to lead your forces? What gives you the idea that he knows anything about commanding an army? It's crazy. Right, yes. And then apparently the Droid fleet, which was the ones that he was delivering the weapons to earlier that attacked him when he found out they were weapons, they retreat just because they see that, oh, there's a coordinated force, so we better retreat because we weren't expecting this. I'm like, seriously? He got no idea what he's doing, just attack him. Kirk asked for the taxes to be lifted on the gate so that people can come together, and you're like, well, I could see that coming. This was the whole moral story bit you gotta have in there going, well, you gotta have the people coming together and getting along a bit more. And then 3PO and R2 just up and leave for whatever reason. And leave a note that Kirk should be the advisor. And I'm like, what? They finally found Masters. They were happy there. They had a solid job security when they were looking and looking for Masters beforehand. And I'm like, I mean, makes sense, they need to get back to the Tantive 4 and all that, but at the same time, it's like, just in the context of these comics, it's like, why did you do that? You had job security, you had Masters to be able to go, I have Masters now, I don't have to search for Masters anymore. His kingdom, though, seems doomed to incompetency. Because this prince can just go, I like this person, just put them in, without even thinking of like what their actual skill set is. I'm like, yeah, that kingdom's gonna die. Yeah. And a lot happens for the short amount of time it feels like in this as well. Issue 6 is illustrated by Ernie Callum. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's Callum, but with a feather on the second O for whatever reason. And this is the beginning of Star Wars, according to the Droids. And this is the first of a 3-part saga, which is actually, overall, just a retelling of A New Hope from the Droids' perspective. I get it, they get this. They changed some parts. For no reason, it seems like, but it's just to make it more entertaining for the Droids, I guess. Anyway. And it's basically a retelling of A New Hope. Main difference is that 3PO has more exposition to what's happening throughout it. Like there's more exposition to explaining everything, but that is the comic format that I've noticed with each of the adaptations, they tend to have more explaining everything that's going on than us just reading the comic and going, let's show you, don't tell. I like how they made Vader's speech bubbles black, though. That's good. And, yes. It deviates when, instead of being picked up by Jawas, R2 sinks into the ground. And then 3PO does. And then under the ground they find these beaver-looking creatures. And 3PO somehow can translate it. I mean, it's 3PO. He's the universal translator. That he has a use there. And the speech bubbles say Chica and Chi. And I couldn't help thinking of, oh yeah, Chica Chica, when I'm reading it. And okay, apparently they want the droids to be their masters for some reason. It's a totally different, like, sidetrack. And even though we've seen 3PO speaking another language to them, he tries to tell them what he wants to tell them in basic. I can assume he's saying it in their language, but he's still saying it in basic. I can read the English words. It's like, shouldn't you be translating it? You can understand a bit what's going on just from him talking to R2, and then you can translate it. And apparently 3PO misunderstood the serve part, and they want to feed the droids to Gota, a giant acid lizard. And it's like, 3PO, you're supposed to be a translator. Why did you screw that up? Anyway, it's funny. And it's a little side thing. And somehow they get out of it by R2 shorting out his electrical system, like in some of the earlier Droids comics. But then he's fine afterwards. It's like, in the previous issues, one of the previous issues, he's like short out the electrical system and then his synapses are fried or whatever they called it. I was like, well, you didn't stick to that, did you? I was like, oh, after that they get captured by the Jawas? And then I went, that whole section was random. Like, why? Why do you even have that in there? Anyway, I guess I wanted to make it different from the other adaptation of the movie. And it expands and actually shows 3PO being taken away, which is nice. It expands some little bits. And then part 2 is titled The Force. Somehow the unmotivated R5 unit morphed into a red R2 unit. Luke knows already has a bad motivator from the start. I'm like, okay. And it seems to skip a lot of the bargaining part when the droids are sold, so it does take out parts but then add in these random bits, and also adding 1 or 2 bits that might have been like, okay, that actually happened. R2 apparently zips off right in front of 3PO, and 3PO doesn't even try to stop him. 3PO sort of tries to half chase him, and then he goes, no, I'm not going to catch up to him. Stuff it. Going. And R2 encounters sand people, which is crazy, because R2 takes one down, not by electrically zapping him, no. He grabbed part of his clothing and just twirled it around and knocked him out. I'm like, what? And then hides under a bantha to hide from the other ones around him, and somehow that works. And then it gets even better, because R2 is found by the sand people. Then he escapes by conjuring a giant hologram of 3PO. It's madness, but it happens in this comic. And so the rest continues like we know, other than that they changed that Ben is sitting with a smaller box and Anakin's lightsaber at the table, while Luke's standing at Ben's home. Like, the whole situation with Ben Kenobi being at his place, like they're not sitting around that table. They've actually got Luke standing up and Ben is sitting at a separate table that is different looking. And 3PO isn't shut down during the whole thing of that. I like how it puts a bit more emphasis on that Luke feels alone, especially as Biggs just left him and stuff. Mentions that a bit more, which is cool. Issue 7, also illustrated by Ernie Callum. Something, I don't know how to pronounce it. This is part 2 out of 3 of Star Wars according to the Droids. And the first title is Darth Vader's Vengeance, which is pretty cool. It opens up telling more of the droids being chased by stormtroopers rather than just locking the door like in the movie. And then it has, the funny thing is they find, to hide from them, they go into a place called Acme Droid Services. Which has got to be a reference to Looney Tunes and the whole Acme thing with Wile E. Coyote and Bugs Bunny and that. And they'll hide in there, they order parts, and then it looks hilarious. Especially as 3PO got pants. Somehow, there's droid pants that you can just put on and take off. Who knew? And the owner tries to get them to pay when they leave, but R2 just zaps them. Of course, he was all like, no refunds, sort of thing. And they never end up hiding in the room, which is weird to me, because I wonder what they were thinking when they made this comic about what they'd actually adapt faithfully and what they actually wanted to just muck around with. So, okay. Tarkin looks a bit different. And the Imperial uniform is blue and red that he's wearing as well, which is a bit weird. But hey, that's how it goes sometimes with these comics. It's the old Marvel ones. Han is a lot easier to convince to rescue Princess Leia in this one. And 3PO says about finding an unguarded computer outlet right in front of a stormtrooper. It's like the stormtrooper wouldn't look over and go, hey, what are you talking about an unguarded computer outlet for? I'm gonna get them. They skip the taking the maintenance bit, and the droids for some reason encounter Vader and Tarkin, and escape by manually controlling the elevator. Somehow. And Vader disintegrates a stormtrooper for his stupidity, which was actually a pretty cool moment. Stormtroopers are blasting at the droids for whatever reason, and they are defeated by an oil slick. And 3PO, of course, makes a pun about something about oil slick. I forget exactly what it is off the top of my head. All the lightsabers in this issue are black and yellow for whatever reason. So black core with the yellow around the outside. And apparently the Vader versus Ben duel blocks the droid's escape path in this version. And I'm like, that didn't happen. But okay. And we have issue 8. Which is part 3 of 3 of Star Wars according to the Droids, and this is the final Droids comic. And it is titled The Last Jedi. And suddenly, in this one, the lightsabers are the right colours. R2 somehow picks the gap between Ben and Vader and slides through them, dodging a lightsaber, then he pulls 3PO through. I'm like, you what, mate? They're just gonna ignore the droids while they're fighting, when obviously when they're in the movie, but they're like, they didn't just look and go, Vader, like, and pretending I'm Vader, like, force push them away, out of the way. You're interfering with the fight. It gives a wider view, and the two are dueling on a staircase for some reason. Which is completely different to the movie. I'm like, where did they get this from? I don't know. Maybe they based it off an earlier script? Possibly. But it's not accurate to the movie. 3PO gets saved from some molten components by R2, which is not shown in the movies. And Luke shoots one TIE and then they gave up. They don't show any other TIEs being destroyed. And yet they just give up after one of them dies. It's like, I'm not getting paid enough for this. I'm going. And it was way too easy for them to escape them. And all the rebels on the Yavin 4 are in cold weather gear. It looks like, I'm like, it's supposed to be tropical, isn't it? Why are you wearing cold weather gear? I guess it looks better. Somehow. R2 projects the plans rather than it being on a view screen in the briefing room as shown in the movie, so the whole setup looks different. And it shows a female pilot front and center in the panel, which I thought was interesting because we don't really see that in the movie as much. Or we see it in the comic, which is nice to see. And R2 just goes over to the Falcon and pops off some tracking droid that was on it. And the funny thing about that is the tracking droid says, "Oop noop." Oop noop. Oop noop. Oop noop. That was funny. And apparently it'll destroy the base's main generator if the base has one. It's like, we don't even know if the base has a main generator. And somehow it has missiles, in this tiny little droid it has missiles. And I'm like, what? And R2 gets pinned by the missiles. And 3PO ends up stopping the droid by closing a blast door on it, which was actually pretty clever for 3PO. Although who would know that that was in his programming? I certainly didn't. And all the while, R2 should be reporting to Luke, which I thought was pretty funny how through the whole thing, I'm like, he's chasing after this droid and that, but he should be reporting to Luke. And they're different looking to what I assume are TIE pilots. That's some really different TIE pilot outfits that are actually white and they look very different. Then it shows a bit of R2 being repaired more, which is nice. And all the rebels have outfits that look more like the Senate or Imperial Guards at the end, which I thought was a bit odd. They all looked like that. Anyway, that was my thoughts on the Droids comics. If you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. And you can click that bell notification for updates on the latest uploads when they come up. Hopefully, as long as YouTube is nice to you. But yeah, what did you think of this? Comment, what do you think? What do you think, even if you haven't watched it and listening to me talk about it? And if you've read it, it'd be interesting to have a chat. The continuity thing with the Droids issue comic still gets me. Because it's like, I read it and I can't totally say that it's in that time frame when I'm reading it. It's like, okay, I guess that does. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey,